Well, we want to welcome everyone this morning. I know people are going to be drifting in, getting used to the cold weather. Today, we're actually going to begin our study of Nehemiah. We'll be continuing this into February. Uh, uh, Theoretically, we finished our study of Ezra last week, or at least according to the lesson book. I will do a little bit of a coverage of the last few chapters of Ezra as we begin class today. But before we begin our study, I'd like to ask Josh if he'd lead us in a word of prayer.
Father, in prayer. You are, we thank you for this wonderful day you've given us. We thank you for the safe travel you've granted us to be here today. And thank you for giving us the ability to study your word. We ask that you open our minds to your word so we can fully collect it and understand it. We ask that you have hands to teach us your word and help them through things that he's in need of. We mostly thank you for your written inspired word that you've given us that we're studying today. And we thank you for the Lord Jesus on the cross for our sins. It's his name that we pray. Amen.
Amen. Going to look at Nehemiah today. Nehemiah actually means God comforts. We're going to be looking at Nehemiah, his position as a cupper bearer to the king of Persia. As I mentioned, I want to kind of finish off a little bit of Ezra's. Remember, last week we had just gotten into chapter 7 and been introduced to Ezra for the first time. Ezra comes to Jerusalem about 70 years after the temple is completed. So he comes in about 445 BC. He comes to teach the law of Moses. He is backed by a decree from Artaxerxes, who is the king of Persia at this time. In the verses, or chapters 8 through 10, which are not covered in the lesson book, we get details of his return, of the Levites and others that he brings with him in the migration, the treasure that he's going to bring with him. It's pointed out in these verses that no troops are sent with him, and he does not ask for them, feeling like it's should be a sign of God's favor that they would be protected on their journey to Jerusalem, which does take 4 months. They return to Jerusalem. The treasure that he is carrying with him, that the king has decreed, including more utensils and things to furnish the temple that had been looted when the Babylonians originally destroyed the temple, are brought back. He deals with, and then finally he deals with the problem with intermarriages and breaking up the marriages that have been made in the 70 years since the rebuilding of the temple. The people have gone against the law and intermarried with the people of the land. There's reference later on to King Solomon, and that the land had gotten into trouble in the first place because of intermarrying, and the Solomon allowing the wives to worship their gods and bring the worship their gods into Israel. And of course, people started worshiping other gods in addition to the one true God. We also learn more of the condition of Judah, why Ezra was going back. Jerusalem remains in ruins. There's actually, as we saw in Ezra chapter 4, there had been actually a decree from Artaxerxes that no building could be done to rebuild the city itself. And apparently there were attempts, or at least discussion of it. As we talked about, there was opposition from the people of the land, those round about them. They actually hired counselors that would go to the royal court and send letters and go to court accusing the Israelites of possible rebellion, which had resulted in a decree saying that there could be no rebuilding of Jerusalem itself unless another decree is issued by the king. Condition of the land itself, that they've been subject to raids because they do not have the protection of the city walls. The people have to come over, live in constant fear, perhaps even danger to the temple. As we mentioned, the people in that 70 years have intermarried and perhaps started worshiping other gods. We're going to learn in Nehemiah that the wealthy have exploited the poor, that they have, through lending money, they've been able to, and then of course having a time of drought so people could not pay it back. They lend money and then are able to acquire land, and even having their fellow Jews sell their sons and daughters into slavery to pay back the loans, all of which is forbidden under the law of Moses. So that when Ezra goes back, there is a great need for someone who is going to teach the people the law of Moses and bring them to obedience again. Also a great need in the land to fully restore Jerusalem and not just the temple. So that now we hit the time of Nehemiah, which is actually almost over a dozen years after Ezra returns. We start the book of Nehemiah. Again, we mentioned that Nehemiah is a cupbearer. We find this out at the end of the first chapter. He's a cupbearer to the king of Persia. I don't know if anyone knows what that means. What's that?
You taste the wine to make sure it's not poison.
Okay, yeah, it's not just somebody who's serving the drinks to the king. He's also protecting the king. He actually is a food or a drink tester, so that, in other words, each day his life is threatened. I mean, because at any time he could be poisoned with an attempt. So he's actually risking his life serving the king. It's actually not a minor role in the kingdom, and of course the cupbearer gives someone access to the ruler. One among the intimates, even though you're a servant, that you are there with the king and able to interact with him on a daily basis. When I think of cupbearer too, my mind went back to Joseph. In his time and his rise in Egypt. Of course, Joseph was sold into captivity. He was acquired as a servant, was managing Potiphar's household, and was false accusation from Potiphar's wife, is thrown into prison where he meets a baker and a cupbearer for Pharaoh. And he correctly interprets dreams for them as to what their future is going to be. He asks the cupbearer to remember him when he's returned to his position. And of course, again, for Pharaoh, he's serving the same capacity. He's tasting everything that the Pharaoh may drink and protecting him, but he also has access in that he can confide. And when Pharaoh has a dream that no one is able to interpret, the cupbearer finally remembers Joseph, and of course we know from here that Joseph interprets his dream. Joseph rises to be a high official in the kingdom of Egypt and is able to save his family and his people in times of famine. And of course, we think of Joseph too, another occasion we talked about last week, that despite the enemy sending all these letters and trying to cause all these troubles, we see good coming out of bad in that Darius's decree allows them to finish the temple in 5 years, when this might not have been possible. So anyway, back to Nathaniel. Let's go ahead and read all of chapter 1. And we are introduced to Nathaniel in his own words. Patsy, could you read the first chapter of Nehemiah, 1 through 11?
The words of Nehemiah the son of Hakaliah. Now it happened in the month of Chislev in the 20th year, while I was in Susa, the capital, that Hananiah, one of my brothers, and some men from Judah came, and I asked them concerning the Jews who had escaped and had survived the captivity, and about Jerusalem. And they said to me, the remnant there in the province who survived the captivity are in great distress and reproach, and the wall of Jerusalem is broken down, and its gates are burned with fire. When I heard these words, I sat down and wept, and mourned for days, and I was fasting and praying before the God of heaven. I said, I beseech you, O Lord God of heaven, the great and awesome God, who preserves the covenant and loving kindness for those who love him and keep his commandments. Let your ear now be attentive and your eyes open to hear the prayer of your servant, which I am praying before you now, day and night, on behalf of the sons of Israel, your servants, confessing the sin of the sons of Israel, which we have sinned against you. I and my father's house have sinned. We have acted very corruptly against you, and have not kept the commandments, nor the statutes, nor the ordinances which you commanded your servant Moses. Remember the word which you commanded your servant Moses, saying, if you are unfaithful, I will scatter you among the peoples. But if you return to me and keep my commandments and do them, though those of you who have been scattered were in the most remote parts of the heavens, I will gather them from there and will bring them to the place where I have chosen to cause my name to dwell. They are your servants and your people, whom you redeemed by your great power and by your strong hand. O Lord, I beseech you, may your ear be attentive to the prayer of your servant and the prayer of your servants who delight to revere your name, and make your servant successful today, and grant him compassion before this man. Now I was the cupbearer to the king.
Okay, so Nehemiah begins. He receives this report from his brother, and then the background information is indication that likely his brother was part of a delegation that had gone to Jerusalem on behalf of the Persian king. They are at this point in Susa, which is a fortress city of the kings of Persia, that we can remember that from our study of the book of Esther, that took place in Susa, an acting capital of the kingdom. So we can think of this being in Iran. They are not even in Babylonia. They're this far removed from Jerusalem. What kind of report does his brother give? Tell him this happened and what is happening in Jerusalem.
The city walls are down and they've been burned, and it's really bad.
Well, and the idea, and of course, this has been this way since Babylonia leveled the city. I mean, but it's kind of like, and from Nehemiah's opinion, he's seeing that this devastation has still occurred. And we're going to see it's actually considered kind of a reproach to God that has not been restored. Nothing has been done in all this time, and it still looks to everyone like the Israelites are a defeated people, and in so reflecting upon their God. What is his reaction when he hears how horrible the conditions are in Jerusalem?
Wept and mourned for days.
Okay. And he prays and fasts, he mourns. This tells us something about Nehemiah, where his heart is. What about his prayer? Anything that stands out for you in reading his prayer? I mean, how does he approach God?
Very penitent.
Okay, humbly, and he readily kind of traces the history of what has happened, that it's because they have turned from him and that they will turn back from him. There's not an approach where, God, why is it taking so long? That it's been more than 150 years since your people have come back and your city is still in ruins. And there's also, in his humble approach, also still again confessing the sins of the people that they turned from him, and also recognizing that if the people are faithful, even though they've been scattered among nations, they'll be brought back and restored.
Hans?
Yes.
I just had a couple thoughts. What you were asking, like our reaction to his reaction. It kind of reminded me of David as a young man when he went to the front lines and had Goliath taunting the people. You know, like people seemed to be okay with it, but David was absolutely not okay with it. And I think Nehemiah sees the city in ruins, and this is an awful thing. This should not be. And so I just see kind of the heart of King David in a sense there. And the other thing, I don't think we have evidence that Nehemiah personally worshipped idols, but it's interesting to me when I read this prayer, he is confessing what we did as a nation. So I think there's a sense in which I might not be guilty of something, but we as a nation might be guilty of something. And he's confessing this group guilt in a sense. I mean, I know sin is ultimately between us and God, but Nehemiah is obviously confessing something that we have done when I don't know if there's really evidence that Nehemiah personally did it.
Well, and in doing so, he's also confessing recognition of this has been done to the people because of what we have done as we have done as a nation. There's also this idea, as you were talking about, that he's mourning, but he is mourning what is done in approaching God, but it's because you can mourn something and just say, oh, this is horrible, but he actually is wanting to take action, and his action at this time is petitioning God, but we see later he's willing to take action and step forward himself to do things. It's not that he's going to sit back and wait. It's so that he is in great distress, and we might think of the dilemma that Queen Esther had at this time too. That how can if he's thinking about doing anything, he can't really go to the king and bring this up, because we see in Esther that you did not approach the king unless he beckoned you to. And Esther went off and prayed and meditated for several days before she went to the king, even though she's the queen, to petition him for something. And of course, and of course, at this time, we're going to see how this takes place. And of course, we don't see Nehemiah. It doesn't seem like he purposely approaches the king, but when the opportunity is there, he's ready. And it seems like he's ready in his own mind too, that he has been praying and contemplating this and thinking about what can be done. So let's go ahead and look at how things progress. I mean, we're going to see that his prayer is answered, and of course, we see this as a very devout prayer. He's going to not just kind of treat this as, Jerusalem's in ruins. It's been like this for decades. Nothing's going to happen anyway, but the idea that he has prayed to the Lord that he's going to do something. And of course, when you pray for the Lord to do something, it means that we better be part of the solution. You don't just sit back and, oh, God's going to do everything for us. Josh, could you read verses 1 through 10 of the second chapter of Nehemiah? Oh, I was going to pick on that, Josh. But if
Oh,
you-
my
if
bad.
you
No,
wanted
that
to-
Josh thing is up there. You know, it's a lot of words.
Yes, please. I mean, it's okay, you can read and take it.
And it came about in the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, that wine was before him. And I picked up the wine and gave it to the king. Now I had not been sad in his presence. So the king said to me, "Why is your face sad, though you are not ill? This is nothing but sadness of heart." Then I was very much afraid. And I said to the king, "May the king live forever. Why should my face not be sad when the city, the site of my father's tomb, is desolate, and its gates have been consumed by fire?" Then the king said to me, "What would you request?" So I prayed to the God of heaven. Then I said to the king, "If it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor before you, I request that you send me to Judah, to the city of my father's tomb, that I may rebuild it." Then the king said to me, with the queen sitting beside him, "How long will your journey be, and when will you return?" So it pleased the king to send me, and I gave him a definite time. And I said to the king, "If it pleases the king, let letters be given me for the governors of the provinces beyond the river, so that they will allow me to pass through until I come to Judah. And a letter to Asaph, the keeper of the king's forest, so that he will give me timber to make beams for the gates of the citadel, which is by the temple, for the city of the wall, and for the house to which I will go." And the king granted them to me, because the good hand of my God was on me. Then I came to the governors of the provinces beyond the Euphrates River, and gave them the king's letter. Now the king had sent with me officers of the army and horsemen, and when Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite officially heard about it, it was very displeasing to them that someone had come to seek the welfare of the sons of Israel.
Okay, so how does Nehemiah get an opening to address the situation in Jerusalem?
He looked sad.
Okay.
He has to look sad.
Well, and what does this tell us about perhaps the relationship of Nehemiah with the king?
They were close enough that he recognized.
Well, yeah, he's close enough, and of course, part of this is if you're working with someone every day, but on the other hand, this is a very different situation because here it is the servant and the king that might be expected to just ignore them. And it does tell us that Nehemiah was genuinely moved by all this. I mean, he's really down. I mean, and it's obvious. And then when the king asked him what's wrong, why is Nehemiah afraid at first? And, I mean, any thoughts? Why was King Esther afraid? Or Queen Esther afraid?
Because you don't know what kind of mood the king's gonna be in, I guess.
Right, you don't know what kind of mood he's in, and maybe the easy answer would have been just saying, "Oh, well, I'm a little bit under the weather today. That's okay. I'll just drop this," because the king might not be in the mood to have all this dropped in his lap. So, what is the first thing that Nehemiah does then after the king has asked him?
Pray.
He prays, and I thought this is very interesting. I mean, here we've had the prayer in the first chapter. He prays here before he does it, and of course we think, Esther prayed too. Esther took 3 days. This you have a few seconds, and it kind of reminded me one time. Sometimes we neglect to pray. Paul admonishes us to pray continually, but we don't think about that we're praying even when we're maybe in the midst of a conversation. And I know I had that happened to me one time. I was talking with a preacher. We were talking about some issues, and I said, "Well, maybe we should stop now and pray about this." And he mentioned to me, he said, "Well, I've already been praying all the time we've been having our discussion. It kind of reminds you that we don't look at prayer as something separate and you have to go off. I mean, we can have perhaps more deeper prayer and whatnot to go off in our place where we can meditate and pray, but sometimes it's necessary to pray. And it's almost like he's taking a breath with this prayer. Baxter, did you have your hand up?
No.
Oh, okay. I saw it. Yeah.
This is almost like a prayer where he certainly didn't leave the room. He would have to just pause a moment and say, "Dear God, help me say the right thing,"
Mhm.
or help me with this decision, or what do I say here? Not that, he's going to directly put the words in your mouth, but he certainly give you the chance to think about it.
Mhm. Well, you almost see that, yeah, he prays that he's going to do the right thing, and he takes his gulp, and then he's very direct with the king and what the issue is. What does he tell the king why he's sad?
The condition of Jerusalem.
Pardon?
The condition of Jerusalem.
He's thinking of Jerusalem. He talks about he's thinking of the tombs of his ancestors that are broken down. So maybe he's putting it in some terms that the Persian king can understand. You have to remember that Artaxerxes has previously issued a decree, which we mentioned in the book of Ezra, that was forbidding any reconstruction of Jerusalem. So here Nehemiah is putting a different look at it. I mean, this is his ancestors, and he's also, the king knows Nehemiah. He knows he's devout. He knows he's been a faithful servant. And of course, the king has sent Ezra back already, and he must have had confidence in Ezra. And he's kind of realizing that, something is horribly wrong here, and this can be restored. And so the king asked him what he requests. What's kind of interesting about, or I shouldn't say that. What does he request?
Letters of passage?
Pardon?
Letters of passage?
Okay. He requests to be personally sent back, which is kind of interesting because, he's a cupbearer. He's not the only cupbearer. But then he wants letters of passage. He also wants building materials. But it's fascinating to me because it shows Nehemiah has been thinking about it, but it's like, it kind of tells you something about his personality. He's got things ready to go. I mean, he's got his actions all set. It isn't like he hems and haws, well, send me back and I'll sit down overnight and give you a list. And of course, as far as the king is concerned, one of his concerns is he wants peace in the provinces, and Judah is one of the provinces. He also wants them to be producing tribute for him, so that part of what's back in his mind, in addition to trusting Nehemiah, he's looking at this in a different situation, and perhaps the decision to not let Jerusalem be restored was a mistake.
He also wanted to know how long he was going to be gone.
Yes, and which tells us he values Nehemiah. He wants him back. And it is interesting that Nehemiah ends up, we'll read as pursue the book, but he ends up being gone 12 years. So there was a projection that he originally gave him a return time, but he was able to keep postponing that with, and of course he would have gotten permission from the king. And the king, in addition to granting him this pass and his building materials that are going to be supplied, also sends him with troops to protect him on the way, which is something that we mentioned earlier that Ezra did not have. Now, who at the end of the chapter is not happy about this situation? at the last couple of verses.
Sanballat and Tobiah.
Yeah, and I still haven't figured out how to pronounce that, and I don't think Baxter kind of shrugged too. Sanballat. Sanballat is actually the governor of Samaria, which is just north of Judah. And if you remember, Samaria, there was a citadel of Samaria as well as the region of Samaria. And this had been the capital of the northern kingdom. So Sanballat is worshiping the God of the Israelites, but is doing it in a manner that there have been additions and subtractions. We know that the northern kingdom got into trouble because they did not like people going down to the temple in Jerusalem for their worship and set up other places of worship which were not authorized. But anyway, there's indications that Sanballat, and Tobiah is an Ammonite official. He's supposed to be one of the cronies or one of the cohorts of Sanballat. And of course, there's possibility that they've been sending letters right along and trying to discourage the rebuilding of Jerusalem. It's going to be competition economically. There was indication in the background material that perhaps Sanballat wanted to be governor of Judah as well as Samaria, extend his own power, so there's power concerns. And of course, again, not wanting to see the Israelites return to Judah with the rebuilding of Jerusalem. Okay, so any further comments on that? I mean, this is again a remarkable turn of events that just as Josh pointed out, that just by looking sad that you can get this kind of reaction and things move forward. Of course, we know that God is behind it all. And Nehemiah's sincere petition to God, and we're going to see him prove to be a great leader. No other comments?
Yeah. It also kind of shows that he obviously was always positive with him in the past, or in a happy look, so that he took it seriously. Whereas in our own lives, if we constantly are complaining and looking sad, people have a tendency not to believe us or care. Whereas if we look pretty positive and we're sad, they notice. If they're good people, they're going to try to help us.
Yeah, I think we've all worked with people that are just moaning and groaning and everything wrong all the time. And like you said, you turn a deaf ear. Someone who's always there and working and willing to help and putting in, and you notice suddenly that they're shut down, and you're going to do everything you can help. Right? Good point. Kelly, you got your reading glasses?
Yeah.
Could you finish Nehemiah 2:11 through the end of the chapter?
Okay. And I arose in the night, and I and a few men with me. I did not tell anyone what my God was putting into my mind to do for Jerusalem, and there was no animal with me except the animal on which I was riding. So I went out at night by the valley gate in the direction of the Dragon's Well and on to the refuse gate, inspecting the walls of Jerusalem, which were broken down, and its gates, which were consumed by fire. Then I passed on to the fountain gate and to the king's pool, but there was no place for my mount to pass. So I went up at night by the ravine and I inspected the wall. Then I entered the valley gate again and returned. And the officials did not know where I had gone or what I had done, nor had I as yet told the Jews, the priests, the nobles, the officials, or the rest who did the work. Then I said to them, you see the bad situation we are in, that Jerusalem is desolate and its gates burned by fire. Come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem, that we may no longer be a reproach. And I told them how the hand of my God had been favorable to me, and also about the king's words which he had spoken to me. Then they said, let us arise and build. So they put their hands to the good work. But when Sanballat the Honorite and Tobiah the Amorite official and the Geshem and the Arab heard it, They mocked us and despised us and said, 'What is this thing you are doing? Are you rebelling against the king?' So I answered them and said to them, 'The God of heaven will give us success. Therefore we, his servants, will arise and rebuild. But you have no portion, right, or memorial in Jerusalem.'"
Okay, so it said, and of course we cover a lot of ground here because we know it took Ezra 4 months to get there. So Nehemiah has to get everything together, get to Jerusalem. It says he is there 3 days. He has still not approached any of the officials or leaders. What is the first thing he does then after the 3 days? He's kind of been there, assessed the ground situation.
Surveys the
By night,
damage.
he inspected the city.
Okay, he goes and inspects it himself, and he goes by night. Any thoughts why he might do this? I mean, he's obviously doing it where people don't know that he's doing this survey.
So he can see for himself, I guess.
Okay, well, yeah, he's getting a thorough visit, and of course, you know, if you go to an area and you have officials with you or whatnot, they're going to distract you. He's going to go and assess this thing himself. And it is interesting, it tells us again something about his personality. And he's going to be well acquainted with everything before he meets with the official and the nobles and the priests and the influential people and the workers. He's going to be knowledgeable of all these things. And he does go ahead and gather the officials, the nobles, the workers, the priests, etc. And what does he say to them?
He thinks the sad situation they're in. He
Okay.
starts
He
recognize
points out,
where
and
they
of course
are.
now he's clear-eyed about what needs to be done and how horrible things are. Of course, we know when he was back in Susa that he had that report, you know, from his brother, but he's actually seen these things for himself, which I'm sure is very moving. And they go through this description of all these gates that have been torn down, and in some places you can't even walk through because of the rubble, that you have to go outside the city to see what the damage is. But he points out he's knowledgeable of all this, but he gives them basically a pep talk. He said, "Come, let us rebuild the walls of Jerusalem." He's gotten together. He points out that God is with them, God has sent him, and he also points out that the king is behind this, which perhaps helps with some of the officials. And we know back when they rebuilt the temple, it was because the officials were behind things as well. And he says that one of the reasons he points out is that as long as the city of Jerusalem is in ruins, they face reproach from those around about them. And of course, through them, also reproach upon God that their city is able to stay in ruins for so long. And of course, we point out that people have not been able to live in the city of Jerusalem. That when it talks about when they first went back, and it said that the people settled in their surrounding cities and their ancestral lands, they were not, Jerusalem was not restored. There were some, we're going to see in the next chapters, there were people who had built up against the outside walls of what remained in Jerusalem, but not in the city itself. And of course, looking back into the days of David and Solomon, when the king, the city was so magnificent that everyone can see it's been destroyed, and that God will be with them and restore them. So what are the response of the people that he's gathered together? And of course, pointing out the leaders are here too.
So rise and build.
Right, they are they are motivated by this. So it tells us something about, God's Spirit is motivating them, but also that Nehemiah perhaps, that the Spirit is within him, is motivating to others. And it says that they immediately set to work. And of course, now they have the materials, they have the support and the leadership. Okay, what's the reaction of our friends to the north? Sanballat, Tobiah, and this time they added in Geshem and Era. What is their response to all this? Are they saying, oh, great neighbors, can we help you rebuild? Oh, yeah, they're angry. What did they do to discourage the work?
They mock them when they try to ask them if they're rebelling against the king.
They're mocking and they're laughing at them. It's kind of telling that they're saying, are you rebelling against the king? Which kind of goes back to that decree we mentioned from Artaxerxes, that the letter that had been sent to Artaxerxes, one of the letters that had been sent to Artaxerxes in the past, is that these people have been rebellious in the past, they're going to be rebels again. And it almost ties in with the rebuilding of the temple too, where they're just shouting, who authorized this work? And what does Nathaniel tell them? I mean, he's pretty strongly worded. He doesn't mince anything. He doesn't just say, oh, well, the king authorized this, go away. What does he tell them?
God will help them have success.
Okay. Well, I'm talking about when he's talking to Sanballat and Tobiah and Era.
The God of heaven will give us success, therefore we, his servants, will arise and build.
Right, and he's emphasizing that it's God who's prospering this work. God is behind it. If God is behind it, you're not going to be able to stand against it. You're going to have no part in this, and you have no heritage, no right, no memorial in Jerusalem.
It's none of your business, basically.
Yeah, it's none of your business, but he's also saying the way you're acting, you're completely shut out, and this
Right.
is something that God is.
You shouldn't even be asking.
Okay. So anyway, I guess we better.
And they have to know that the king had approved this, maybe you would think it would have come through or they would have opposed them more.
Right, well, and they've seen this, well, he has had all these letters to the governors in the area saying, give us full support.
But they're
And
still
we-
not giving it.
And we know from Ezra coming back that Ezra had the ability to appoint judges who could issue punishments to people who did oppose them. So that there's a lot going for them, so that this opposition is really pushing it. Any other thoughts? Otherwise, Gary, can I get you to read us in closing prayer?
Sure. Lord, thank you for this time that we gather to study a portion of your word. May you always guide and direct us as we move forward.
Amen.
Amen.